Welcome to Aussie Wristwatch. I'm Jessica Liley, and today I am getting to review a brand new watch from a micro brand that I absolutely adore. Yes, that's right. I am looking at Dan Henry's brand new 1972 Maverick range. And in particular, I'm going to look at the automatic, but we'll get into that shortly. Let's talk a little bit about Dan Henry, shall we? So, I've never met Dan, but we have chatted online since I started this channel. I discovered his brand, I think, trawling the watch blogs for micro brands for a video I was doing, and I came across his watches. Since then, I've obviously found many other people online, whether they're blogs, reputable magazines, or YouTubers, have reviewed his watches. And in particular, I know the Urban Gentry, for example, that loves Dan Henry. There's a number of those. But I reached out to Dan a long time ago, just when I was sort of starting out. And I said, look, I really love your watches. And I do this every now and then to many different brands out there. And I just ask, I'm like, can I borrow a watch and review it? Because, you know, I've done some reviews where they're on the papers, so to speak. That's lawyer speak, by the way, I feel. You know, they're not the same. I get it. People complain. Well, not everyone, but some people have complained when I've done that. Anyway, Dan came back to me and he's like, look, I don't really do that because I'm a very small producer. And in any event, we stayed in touch. He actually, last year, you would have seen the video, the first female watch he did, he sent that to me to review. And the other week I got a message from him and he's like, I think it's time to send you another watch to review. I've got the new 1972 Maverick coming out as part of like they're having a Black Friday launch for it. And so this watch got sent to me and it arrived yesterday. So it's very new. I'm wearing it. I'm so in love with it already. And it's actually the automatic version of the 1972. So it's not the chronograph, but it's automatic movement. And I'll go through the specs shortly, but it's lovely. So just a little bit of history on this watch. This watch, although I don't know whether it actually specifically stated it on the website at the time, but Dan had an original 1972 watch, which looked very much like, or it was a nod to the Porsche design, 1972 Porsche design by Alfina. And if you don't know Dan Henry, you should. And one of the amazing things about Dan is he's probably one of the most prolific vintage watch collectors out there, at least out there that we know about. And he has this website, which if you go to danhenrywatches.com, then there's a link on his website to, I guess you'd call it a blog. It's an encyclopedia of his entire vintage watch collection. It's unbelievable. You want to know about a watch from any decade? Chances are it could be on there. Because Dan has this amazing collection of watches, he is able to draw upon all of those and those designs in the watches that he creates. Now, the 1972 I was just telling you about, the Porsche design, Dan had done a Dan Henry version, 1972. The quirky thing about Dan up until now is his watches were limited edition. So, for example, the 1972 model only had 1,972 models. Dan has recently confirmed to me that he's no longer doing that, just because I think that was cost prohibitive and just too difficult to manage. So good news all. This new 1972 I think is here to stay, at least until there's another iteration. It's not going to sell out due to it being a limited edition. And I should state that a lot of his watches, so I've got the 1962, which I don't have up here with me, but that is very much a nod to a classic racing chronograph. We could talk about who that might be, but it's just the way Dan does his watches. And it's not that they're not a homage watch in the strictest sense of that. I think there's probably a term, a defined term for that, which I don't think Dan would meet, but I like to say he gives a nod to a classic watch, and you can see the aesthetic kind of come through. You know, maybe he's playing homage a little bit to it, but it's not a homage watch, so to speak. The new Dan Henry 1972 automatic. Now this is not the racing chronograph. This has a inner GMT bezel, which is actually quite fun. I've set it to LA time because that's where I seem to know quite a few people. And I've already found that quite useful, and it's probably one of the easier GMTs I've got to use. So thanks, Dan, for that. It's very cool. This is an automatic watch, so the movement's heavier than, for example, the 1962 quartz that I have of his. And this whole watch just has great heft in a good way. Even I gave it to my wife last night so she could have an initial look at it. She put it on and she's like, oh, it feels nice and heavy, but in that good way. Like it's just sitting very nicely. It's 41 millimeters in diameter. It's a 12.9 millimeter thickness with a 20 meter lug width. It's screw-in crown, screw-back case with the F-14 Tomcat fighter jet on the back, which looks amazing. Just a side note, all of Dan's watches have something a little bit fun on the case back. So I'll leave that up to you to discover when you buy them, but it's a little extra something that Dan does with his watches, which I think is very, very cute and a lot of fun. He has an automatic Miyota Japan caliber 8215 with date and 40 hours of power reserve, and it's also 100 meters water resistant, 330 feet if you're that way inclined. Dan in particular sent me an email. I said, look, is there anything you want me to say in particular about the watch? And he said, no, say what you want, but he gave me some details. So he chose them, for example, this is straight from Dan, he chose the Miyota 8215 movement because in his view, the Seiko NH35 makes a horrible rotor noise. Now, he doesn't like that. I can neither confirm nor deny because I must confess, as you know, I don't pay that much attention to these things, but he's making the watches, so I'm going to go with what Dan says on that. So he wanted to try this movement also because some manufacturers and collectors think it's better compared to the NH35. He's basically wanting to do a real life trial to decide for himself. So I guess we're all beta users, whoever buys this watch, particularly people who actually care about movements and notice those kinds of things, whereas I don't so much. But that is the rationale for the change in movements from Seiko to Miyota. He also said, to be fair, the Seiko movement's a very strong movement. He doesn't hate it by any stretch of the imagination, is what I could glean from what he said to me in the email. But yeah, he just wanted to try something new. The chronograph model of this is 50 meters water resistant. The one I'm wearing is 100, as I said. There's a few small differences. It's pure sapphire crystal. It's not sapphire coated. As I said, not limited edition anymore. And basically he said to me what I've said to you, but his words, sales proportion of the watches, shipping them in those numbers just became way too difficult for him, in particular with the warehouse. He'd basically sell out worldwide at the exact same time, so it was too hard. I think that's a great problem to have, by the way, Dan, so congratulations that they're so popular that people get right on them. With Dan, he, like most micro brand watch producers, whatever you want to call them, they don't make in-house movements. We've just talked about that, obviously, and they source parts and then assemble usually in a central location somewhere. I don't know exactly what Dan does, but the reason they do that is to keep the cost down, and Dan talks about this in particular and talk about cost. So these are 350, this is 360 because they come in 4 variations. They're really two clear variations, then a variation on a theme. So the automatic comes in silver and black is what I'm saying. The chronograph also comes in silver and black, but there's an automatic or a chronograph. Chronograph is quartz. Yeah, so the automatic is a quartz Miyota, Japanese caliber OS00. It also has a day date, which is pretty sexy. I must admit, I quite like that one too. But anyway, so quartz and automatic, chronograph, GMT bezel. That's kind of your key differences with these watches, and it's 360 or 350 US, which is still an exceptional, notwithstanding our awful exchange rate at the moment, it's still an exceptional watch, I think, for that price. And that's consistent with all of Dan's watches. He's really big on making these watches accessible to most people who are watch enthusiast, collector, or just want to buy a nice watch. This is what I love about him, I think, the most, other than his passion for watches and the fact that he's so kind to me. But he loves watches so much, and I mean, his collection is nuts, absolutely bonkers, batshit crazy. Like, it's unbelievable. And I'm talking now, this is not Dan talking, but I feel like he's, in collecting those watches, he's understood the value of them, but also wanted to present to people a lesser expensive version of something like that. Understanding that most people can't amass a collection of watches at that price point. And so making them more accessible to people and getting people to enjoy watches and the quality and all of that is kind of his jam. It's his passion, I think, to bring a really cool, well thought out, well produced, well manufactured, exceptionally cool looking watch, but for a price point that people can actually access. And that's what I love about these watches. That's the... I can't find, what's that French word? I'm so bad with French. Je ne sais, or whatever it is, about why they're so cool. Because there's a lot of micro brands out there doing amazing things. Absolutely. And various price points. And some of them are very expensive. So Dan keeping his watches sub 500 US just makes them so much more appealing, I think, to a larger group of people who want, again, a well-made, good-looking watch. This one is, I think, exceptionally well made. I love the bracelet on this. I mean, I must confess, I have actually resized it. I had to get a pin and a hammer out, which made me very nervous about getting a hammer near a watch. But once I watched many people doing it on YouTube, I was much more comfortable with that, understanding that it was like, okay, this is what you're meant to do. So I resized the bracelet. It's matte black, so it's dead sexy. And it's actually lovely. Like, it kind of, it's good quality. Like, it's nice and heavy without being, you know, prohibitively so. It's got quick release in the back there, which I think all his watches do. Certainly the other one I have in this one. So I think it's a consistent theme. That's genius, by the way. You all know, if you watch this channel, that quick release strap is the way to go for me. It's just a classic, classy watch, and at 41 millimeters, it sits really well on my wrist. Dan, as usual, you've excelled yourself. Let's talk about negatives. Are there any negatives? I mean, I don't know. I mean, someone would probably sit there and talk about, you know, the value of the movement versus what used to be in it or what could be in it. I mean, I don't know enough to comment on that, so I'll just let that one go through to the keeper. I actually really like the rotating GMT bezel, the inner bezel. I like the second crown where it is. Now, it's actually, Omega, take note, it's actually a lower profile to the one that Omega has on the Seamasters, which are very divisive, as we know. I don't mind it. I think WatchGringer called it a toothpaste cap, which made me laugh out loud, because as soon as I saw it, I went, oh yeah, it really is. This one does not look so much as a toothpaste cap, because it's flatter and it's a lower profile, so it doesn't stick out like the proverbial as much. So I think that works really well. It's at the 10 o'clock still. I like a crown at the 10 o'clock. I think, you know, I set the time with it as soon as I got it. It was super easy to use. You could actually hear the rotor, which I actually quite liked that. I thought that was pretty cool. There's some little design accents that Dan's put on the bracelet with his DH on the actual clip. So it's just a pretty watch. And if you love the Porsche design, I think you're going to love these watches, because they really are a classic nod to that overall design. I don't have a lot of negatives to say about the watch because I am a Dan Henry fan. You know, I just appreciate how nice he is. I think I once asked him if he'd want to do an interview on the channel, and he said to me, English is not my first language, so I'm not comfortable doing that, which struck me as not odd, just, you know, like, I speak English. That's all I speak. And so it always kind of fascinates me when people from another country who speak multiple languages, which is much better than I'm doing, come to me and or anyone and apologize for their English, even though it's not their first language, and they're speaking like one or two more languages than I speak. I mean, I can fumble my way through Greek, but I can't have a conversation. Maybe one day I'll be able to talk him into it and we can fumble our way through the language barrier together, which I think is part of the fun half the time. But the fact that Dan is sweet enough to support my channel, I really appreciate, and so that will not ever be forgotten. And it's also just really exciting to be able to talk to the man himself making these watches that I really love. I wish I could have every single one he's made in the collection, but like everyone, inflation's hit me hard this year, so I've had to stop any kind of watch buying, even at that price point. But that won't last forever. And one day I'll make a film, it'll make some money, I'll be able to buy some more damn watches. Check out this watch, check out his website, check out his blog. I think it's timeline.watch. And like I said, it's in danhenrywatches.com, and then it's up the top, timeline.watch. Go in there and go down that rabbit hole. You'll be in there for hours. It's fabulous. It's unbelievable. But yeah, have a look at his other watches. He's still got other watches available. They're not all sold out. A lot of them are, but you can see the previous designs. I think, unfortunately, for the launch of this model, he's taken down the older 1972 design pictures, so you can see how awesome that looked, and you can understand why that probably sold out in a red hot minute. But yeah, he's a great micro brand. Go and support him if you love watches and you want to add just a little something cute and special to the collection. I think, like I said, their value for what they are. A lot of time, thought goes into the design of the watches, and they're coming from someone who draws on a plethora of research and knowledge to produce something like that, which I think is amazing. As always, Dan, thank you very much. Thank you so much. I'm so excited about this watch. Words cannot express, I think, the level of excitement. If you got a Dan Henry watch, let me know. Tell us in the comments. Tell me what you love about Dan Henry. You know, let's have a conversation about it. But my general overall view is it's a solid watch. I really enjoy it. It looks great on the wrist. It's really well finished. He's done a really great job with this watch. So until next time, everyone, have a fabulous week.